All right. Good morning, Doug. We have questions from our viewers today, and we also need to, I think, address this other mass shooting that just occurred earlier this week in Texas. It was followed by a mass shooting 2 weeks ago in Buffalo, New York, at a grocery store. And you wrote a book, actually a series of books, but the most recent one of them, Assassin, actually covers mass shootings in some detail, and it almost parallels what we're seeing today, at least in the political context of what it means. So tell us first, what exactly was, how were mass shootings used in that book?
Okay, well, in Assassin, which is the third of the novels that John Hunt and I have put together, and it's an excellent novel, and I really urge all of our, everybody promotes their own products, obviously, but I think objectively, it's a hell of a good read with lots of interesting themes in it. Anyway, one of the themes in the novel is that the political powers that be were trying to illegalize guns, seriously illegalize them in the US, decides that the best way to get the public on their side is to have some mass shootings. So they fabricate some. And it's just the way these people think. That's how you get public opinion on your side. You set up a really serious false flag, and all the chimpanzees start hooting and panting and want you to do something.
Right.
So pretty much like that. But there seems to be, and what do we know? Because all we know is what we hear in the media, or what they selectively find somebody. I mean, we don't know anything, quite frankly. But what's this tweet that we got from
Nick?
Nick? Yeah.
Well, it's about a lot of things that just don't add up with regard to this shooting, and we can go into some of the details of it. And maybe I'll share in a link in the description so people can go check out this particular Twitter thread, because it covers a lot of interesting things. But it talks about a lot of things that don't make sense. Like, for instance, the shooter got to the school at 11:30, but he didn't actually enter the school until 13 minutes later. Like, what was he doing? He apparently was just standing around shooting at a couple of people at a funeral home, but missing, and then shooting at the school itself, apparently. So they're like, why? Usually there's like a lockdown alert to go to the schools. But he goes through a whole bunch of different things like this, a lot of inconsistencies that are in the story. And we did have some things where the police had to change their story a couple of times already. So they said, for instance, that the shooter was engaged by a security officer for the school. They exchanged fire. The shooter dropped a bag there and then entered the school and went into a classroom. Like they said that. Turns out there was no security officer there, apparently, is what they've clarified now. There was no security officer, and he was not met with any resistance in entering the school at all. So that's just one key element that stood for 2 days, though, without them correcting. Like, that seems like an obvious fact that could easily be, checked, but they threw that out there and let it sit for a couple of days before clarifying yesterday.
Well, and another thing that they say, or some people say is the case, is that the police didn't do anything for more or less an hour,
Yeah,
because what is it? Officer safety is paramount, and they're
I
waiting
know.
for an armored SWAT team to come in to, this is
Yep.
all crazy stuff. Will we
Well,
ever
Doug,
find out what actually happened?
I think this one, because there's so many people that were there, and part of it because there's so many parents that were there, because it's a relatively small community. A lot of the parents got to the location. A lot of them were filming stuff. The parents were yelling at the cops to do something, to go in there, or at least let the parents go in there themselves. The parents, or the police, of course, wouldn't let them. Uh, there's one story in the Wall Street Journal about a woman who heard about the shooting. She was 40 miles away. She heard about it. She had two daughters in school. She drove those 40 miles. She argued with the police to go do something. They put her in handcuffs. A federal marshal, by the way, it was a federal marshal put her in handcuffs. She talked her way out of the handcuffs. Then she went back away from the crowd, jumped over the fence, ran in the school, and got her two daughters and brought them out. Meanwhile, the cops are still standing there the whole time.
I know.
So It's outrageous. I mean, get the fuck out of the way. You know, if you're not going to do something, get out of the way.
Exactly. And actually, and when you go deeper than the fact that nobody can get their story straight and it's full of lies apparently everywhere from all quarters, is that school shootings, mass school shootings, only happen in the US. And of course they say, well, this is because we have guns in the US. Well, is it that, or is it because, much more than any other country in the world, there are scores of millions, and that's a correct number, scores of millions of people that are on active drugs. I'm not talking about pot and things like that. I'm talking about Zoloft and Prozac and the Halcyon, and there's 100 of these things, literally, that actually make them crazy. And in the past, school shootings, and they never talk about this, they almost all have been done by kids that are on some of these psychiatric drugs or are getting off of them. And, it unbalances them. And once again, like the theme that we had, one of the themes that we had in Assassin is it's entirely possible this thing has all been fabricated. Of course, you can't say something like this because
you could just say it, Doug.
Yeah, I'll say it anyway, but because it's
possible.
Yeah, we're actually dealing with people that are both crazy and evil, and anything's, and they really are very anti-gun. I mean, you watch any of these lunatics on MSNBC or CNN and all that. I mean, they're hysterically, rabidly anti-gun, but guns aren't the problem. It's the psychology of the individuals involved. It's the general sociology and the political atmosphere of the US, because this is the only country in the world where we have these problems. And it's not because of the guns.
No, there's something sick in the culture that's going on now. And it could be a lot of things. I mean, it definitely, I think, is the drug use, but there's also seems to be some interference, or at least some, well, I'll just say, I was reading about the Buffalo shooter. Remember from 2 weeks ago, the guy went into a primarily black grocery store and shot a bunch of people there. So that's another 18-year-old kid who did this. And apparently this 18-year-old kid was in regular communication with an ex-FBI agent. Regular communication. In fact, with 30 minutes before he went into the shooting, he was in contact with him. Like, that's a little, what are the odds of that? Kind of strange.
Yeah, it's almost like the FBI read our book, Assassin, and decided that's a plan.
He's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And then
actually, remember that Robert Redford movie? It was called 3 Days of the Condor. That was done from a book that was actually called 7 Days of the Condor. And Robert Redford's character, he was a CIA guy who was tasked with basically reading adventure novels all day to find good ideas the fiction writers came up with that they can put into effect.
Wow. Well, here's another strange thing about this story is that this guy, this 18-year-old kid, apparently, had two high-end AR-15s. I mean, you can get a cheap one for sometimes, well under $1,000, but he had at least one of them was one that was about $2,500. Now, this is a kid who worked part-time at Wendy's. So I don't know how he could afford an AR like that.
Yeah, where exactly? And they don't grow on trees, especially today. So what's the story there? Will it ever come out?
I don't know. But I do think that they may have made a mistake with the police standing on the sidelines for so long while this happened. And maybe that ends up just because it's so upsetting to so many people to see cops do this again. This is like the standard deal, and what one of the spokesperson for the Texas police, or I don't know, state police, I think, I'm not sure who it was, but some spokesman for the police last night on CNN said, well, the police were worried about being shot. So that's why they did not pursue, they didn't go until they had backup over there because they were worried about being shot. Now, I remember one time in one of our conversations, I really shit on firemen because I just didn't like calling them firefighters. I thought it was kind of a joke. But I don't think there's a fireman alive who would not have gone in. But the cops, they all stand down. Like it's crazy. I think it's the training. I think it's the training now.
Yes, they're very used to taking orders. Yeah, the whole system has become so corrupt. It's almost like Denzel Washington's movie Training Day, which is a great
Great
movie.
movie.
I recommend
That's
a
a good
lot.
one. Yeah, that's a good one. So anyway, I would encourage everybody to go read Doug's book Assassin to find out what happens next.
Yes,
With all
well,
this.
we'll know more as we come out with the next book, which is called Terrorist. I mean, what comes after Assassin? Terrorist. And anyway.
We may get there. All right. So, Doug, let's get to some questions from this week. For our viewers, if you have questions, the best thing to do is join our Telegram group. There's a link in the description for every video we have. Go to the Telegram group. Periodically, I ask for questions there, and then people upvote them, and I take the most popular ones, and we answer as many as we can here. So, Doug, question number one. The world is deglobalizing. How much of a step back in our standard of living will that provide for us, or will that give us?
Mhm. Well, trade is one of the really major factors that increases standards of living. It makes specialization and division of labor possible across geographical areas, cultural areas that do some things better than other areas. So I'm not a fan of globalization, which represents a whole set of values other than what we're talking about. But the fact that a lot of countries are probably going to put up tariffs and quotas and other barriers to trade. What's going on between Russia and the so-called West is perhaps an overture to what's happening. So the way it's being structured now, not good at all.
And the advantage of trade is that it increases people's standard of living dramatically because of the specialization of labor and so forth. So how much, as you see things unwinding, the kind of this global trade unwinding a bit, how far do you think it'll go, and how far back might that set standards of living?
Well, our friend Jim Kunstler, of course, has written a series of novels and does a weekly blog and so forth, podcasts and all that, called A World. What is it? What's Jim call it? A world made by hand, or a world lit by only by
No,
fire? Or
no, a world made by hand, I think is what it is. Yes.
exactly. You should look that up. Look up Jim Kunstler, and he'll explain very eloquently and in detail how bad things can get. Because it's funny, as we were driving from Punta del Este to Buenos Aires, which is where I am now. I'm back in Buenos Aires now for the first time in 3 years, back at the apartment. I was remarking to myself that if we, even in one of the great agricultural countries of the world, Uruguay, that if the current industrial supply chain system broke down here in the middle of one of the truly agricultural places in the world, we'd starve to death, frankly. Because all that raw wheat in the field, what are we going to do with it? I mean, go out there and this is so that
I got my Angus cows. I'll be fine. I just be all protein diet.
Well, if we had enough gas and the world broke down right then, I think we would have done a U-turn and probably headed back to your farm at that point.
That'd be great. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we are deeply dependent, and it's difficult to even imagine what those dependencies are. And what Kunstler's one of his core ideas is around energy. And basically, if this cheap and readily available everywhere energy is if suddenly that is not available, everything changes.
Everything changes. You don't have any of the products. Your vehicles don't work. You're basically going to be starving and freezing in the dark, which is no fun. It's actually we're actually on a very, very thin line between advanced civilization advancing at the rate of Moore's law and losing it all and falling back to the dark ages.
What do you
And
think it will be the difference maker to make us tip one way or the other?
it's all about the state and government. I mean, the fact that sociopaths and crazy people are the ones that inevitably are drawn towards the government and get into it. And they're the ones that do all these things. So, and the state is growing in power all the time. I think it's scary. The trend is in the wrong direction right now and seems to be accelerating.
Okay. All right, Doug. You often refer to countries as shithole countries. So the question is, what are the conditions that you use to call a country a shithole country? Is it its debt, the way its government is run, the state-owned, if it has a state-owned energy company, if it produces less than it consumes? Like what's the standard you use for that?
I would say it's mostly the culture and the standard of living and the way people interact with each other. So that this is why, the backwoods of most places, like the backwoods outside of the cities in the developed countries of South America, they're shitholes. All of Africa is a shithole. The Middle East is. It's the culture and the standard of living and the way people think. And generally speaking, the more state intervention you have, the more tribal the place becomes, the more dangerous. Yeah. So it's a melange. It's a suite of things, actually.
Okay. Next question. It says, I have a bad feeling these communists will reset everybody's bank account to zero and blame it on a fake hack attack. The fake World War III will be cyber attacks, won't it? And they will say the old system can't be fixed, the backups were corrupted. They'll roll out a CBDC as a solution, and everyone will get 10,000 euros or something like that. What do you think? Is that something possible?
Yeah, like Schwab said, you'll own nothing, and you'll be happy because at least you'll get your what is it, guaranteed annual income or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Your UBI.
Yes, I often wonder about that. The fact that you really don't even get printouts. Well, you can, but you generally, first of all, you don't get stock certificates for the stocks you own anymore. And you don't get bonds for the bonds you own anymore. And the bonds aren't really bonds. They're because the currency is not worth anything. So if your computers break down, what proves that you had an account? And what did you have in the account? It's all gone. It's like that South Park episode where where I think, was it Kyle that went to the bank and he puts his hard-earned $100 in the bank, then he wants it back, and the banker says, "Oh, sorry, all gone."
Right. Yeah, that was tough.
Anything is possible in a digital world that where things aren't real, things aren't tangible, things only exist on your computer, including your ownership of stocks and bonds, and for that matter, your title to real estate.
Right. Well, not only these things only exist on a computer, they only exist on the bank's computer. It doesn't exist on your computer, like the database for what you own or what your bank account is all within the bank. And everyone and so you have to rely on that private database only.
I know, even if I have it backed up somehow, and I'd be the wrong person for that anyway. But so I can imagine going to the giant bank and saying, "Here, it says on my computer I own this." And they said, "Well, it doesn't say it on our computer."
Exactly. Exactly. So it does seem, and this is the great thing about things like blockchain is that you have you don't have to trust any party to know what's in the ledger. Whatever's in the ledger is in the ledger, and it's and everyone can see it at all times as it's public. That's one of the big advantages, but nothing important really is in a blockchain, unfortunately.
No, not at the present time. I mean, the last thing I want to trust in today's world are large institutions.
But
Anyway,
that's where we have our money, Doug.
I know. Well, this is an argument, of course, why you should be sequestering, and I think that's the right word, gold coins and silver coins, and you put them in the safest place you can think of.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, let's see. Given the global fracture and the stockpiling of gold by both China and Russia, do you think that Western economic powers will be forced to act against a rising gold price in order to prevent a ballooning of sovereign wealth for both these nations?
Well, that assumes that Western powers can actually act against a rising gold price. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. And at some point, I'd like to think they'll kind of figure it out intuitively, even if they know nothing about economics, which of course most of them don't. But they need some kind of medium of exchange and store of value instead of using the crappy artificial currencies that almost all the world's countries do. I mean, dirhams and kwachas and pulas. These are names of currencies that people plan their lives around and try to accumulate for the future, which is incredibly stupid because they're just pieces of worthless paper issued by bankrupt governments. So yeah, I think that the world is going to start going back towards gold and silver, the average guy. So the Western powers want to smack down Russia and China because they're accumulating gold and silver. This kind of is a sub meme of this gold suppression theory.
Yes. Yep.
Been out there for so long. I mean, there are people. I mean, I know people out there, brokers, and they say, yeah, they smacked down gold today. Well, first of all, the powers that be, actually, the guys that run the IMF and central banks, they don't care about gold. They actually all think it's a pet rock, okay? They think it's a foible and stupid, and they don't care about it. So they're not actively trying to smack it down. I mean, they just think it's kind of an interesting artifact that the little people out there or somebody is taking up. So no, there's no conspiracy to keep the price of gold down. And if there was, it's been a really unsuccessful one. And if it's the US government that's trying to keep the price of gold down, what are they doing? Are they liquidating the supply in Fort Knox, which of course may or may not exist because it hasn't been audited for forever? I mean, we just don't know, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think their argument is it's around the paper market, that they're around options trading in the futures market, that they're keeping the price suppressed that way. But I think you're right. The whole point is that they haven't done a very good job. When I first bought my first ounce of gold, I believe it was like $320 or something. And that was about 20 years ago, something like that. And, so it's gone up 9 times since I bought it in that time period. I think that they've failed at keeping it down if it's gone up 900% since then.
Yes, not only have they failed, but if they've been shorting gold, I mean, they've actually lost their, so none of this makes any sense. And anyway, if it's possible to suppress the price of gold, well, maybe they should suppress the price of oil and suppress.
Right, exactly. That seems more important right now.
I mean, it's a goofy meme that some people that forget about it. There's all kinds of crazy memes out there in the world today.
Okay, Doug, what do you see as the future for Singapore in terms, is it heading more toward alignment with China or to the West?
Yeah, Singapore, that's kind of an interesting case because, I think it's never mentioned that it used to be that Singapore was just a city in the Malay states, and it was all controlled by Britain. And then it split off from the rest of Malaysia. Good move, because Singapore is mostly Chinese, as opposed to Malaysia, but mostly Malay. So that was a smart move on their part, a secession movement, separatist movement. But it happened. And then Lee Kuan. This is another interesting thing. Lee Kuan Yew is in many ways responsible for Singapore going from a really backward shithole to, in terms of per capita income, the most prosperous place in the world. And when I first went to Singapore in the early 1980s, I didn't see it. I mean, I just couldn't feature it at the time because it seemed to me that it was a government housing project next to an oil refinery. And the charming part of Singapore, the old town, with the little shops and all that type of thing, it was being torn down at the time. And this is all Lee Kuan Yew. This was in the days when, you spit on the sidewalk, you go to jail. You do anything naughty, you get caned and you go to jail. I mean, it was really kind of a police state, but a police state where capitalist values as opposed to socialist type values were upheld. And by God, it actually worked. I mean, I guess, it's a little bit the way China is too. If you, to be rich is wonderful. I mean, who said, Deng Xiaoping said that.
Yeah.
Just don't upset the state or change the social order. And Singapore is like a kinder and gentler version of China, which has been tremendously successful too. So does that mean that having a strong, benevolent dictator is the way to fly? Well, the example of Singapore would seem to indicate, yeah, that's the case. Right? I don't like it much, but to live in Singapore today, if you're rich, it's great.
Yeah.
Unbelievably high standard of living, really safe, really clean. It's great. But
do you think they'll
lives there for one, and other people I know live there.
Do you see them getting closer to China or the West though at this point?
Well, I think they're trying to find, what a lot of these countries have termed the third way, but a very non-socialist third way. So I think they're too smart to want to hitch their wagon to an obviously declining West, but they're afraid of hitching their wagon to China because they don't want to be like Hong Kong or what happened to Singapore, to Taiwan. So, they'll try to stay on the sidelines, like in a way like Switzerland does, kind of like the Oriental Switzerland, if you would. Because,
I see.
There are Malays and there are a lot of Indians, Malays, and
Chinese.
And quite a lot of foreigners there too, but they're mostly Chinese.
Yeah. Okay. Doug, what do you think of Nassim Taleb?
I don't know him. I've never met him. Bill Bonner knows him and likes him. Apparently, he's a very acerbic individual who's a little bit on the hard to get along with side. And I've never read his books, although I've read a lot of quotations from his books, and he's very good at creating memes, like this idea of the black swan. That's solely due to him. And anti-fragile, that's his name too. But just because he's a clever and astute observer, I don't know what his basic values are. And based on because you sent me that question, and the fact is, if his tweets are all very what I haven't read his tweets. I don't read tweets, but what?
Yeah, he since COVID, he's revealed himself as a different person. He was extremely pro lockdowns and masks and strong vaccine enforcement, make him mandatory. He's rabidly anti-Russian. He's come out with the Ukraine thing, and he's extremely anti like people like Glenn Greenwald. Which it's I think how people feel about Julian Assange and how they feel about Glenn Greenwald, I think tells you a lot about that person. Because these are two people who are
A lot.
obsessed with the truth. And if you have a problem with them, then you have a problem with some of the truth. You know, it's kind of the way it looks to me.
Yeah, exactly. So sad to say, based upon, once again, what I hear, because I don't see his tweets, but I'll assume this is all correct. Nassim Taleb is not the paragon of virtue and rationality that we would have liked to have seen.
Yeah, that I thought he was. I did. So I also I have a Twitter friend who was in Nassim Taleb's kind of inner circle for a while, and they had a difference of opinion about how about vaccines and the mandatory nature of them, and it caused this huge public fray, and Taleb handled it like a petulant child. I mean, he just constantly is backbiting and trying to shit on this guy who was like, he was my friend. Taleb was like a idol of his. I mean, and he knew him, and they were like, he meant a lot to him. But he just little difference of opinion, and he turned on him so fast. It was actually shocking, really shocking. So anyway, yeah, it's fine. Actually, the great thing about this last 2 years, have really told us a lot about a lot of people. It's really been remarkable in that regard.
Yes, I feel justified in my poor opinion of humanity in general.
That's true. Yeah.
As time goes on, I like fewer and fewer people, and the ones that I like, strictly them as individuals. And we're both kind of shamed by the fact that we're members of the human race.
I know. That's just true. Oh. Okay, so another person they ask about, does Doug know Martin Armstrong or his work? And do you have any opinions of his Socrates system?
I don't know him, never met him, never talked to him, certainly heard about him. And I don't know what to believe or not to believe, but apparently the Socrates system, it's like a magic black box computer, isn't it?
That's the way I understand it, yeah.
All right, so I don't know. How do you make a magic black box computer that predicts everything that's going to happen? It doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, how many decades do you have to spend with how many people programming a computer and putting all the knowledge of the world in it to come up with predictions of what's going to happen tomorrow morning? I don't buy it. It seems to me like a marketing deal. But on the other hand, what I hear about him, not having talked to him, is that he's generally sound. Am I right? I mean, he comes on the right side of issues philosophically, and he's often right financially too. So
this is what I understand, and again, I don't follow his work closely, but many people over the years have referred me to him, and I think, like you, I get turned off by this black box system, that he has. And if he would just say, say like Gerald Celente, say, I'm a trend follower and I am good at seeing trends, and this is what I think is going to happen based upon the trend, then it'd be much easier for me to swallow versus here's what the computer is telling me. That's just me.
He's probably a guy that has a lot of knowledge, has good judgment, and okay, that's great. But why clutter it up with some magic black box computer that
Well,
anyway.
And once you do it, you can't undo it. You can't say it's not the box anymore. It just reminds me of I always feel when anybody's got this secret system, I always am reminded of Joseph Smith and his peepstones. So I can't get that out of my head. Anytime someone says I got some magic system, I think peepstones.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So Doug, is the CRM stock, the cryomass stock, still a buy for you?
Well, the reason I got into that stock, to recall, is because Tony Weil, I've known for decades, is a very successful and rich stock promoter. And he was responsible for the success of Pharmacielo, where just on that stock, he made $100 million or maybe more. I don't know. So his next deal was going to be a mining deal because he's very well connected in Colombia, but that flamed out, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, in the pot space, anyway, cryomass, long story, and all of these little Vancouver startup, wild idea, make $1 zillion companies, they all have interesting stories and backgrounds and all that. Forget about that. The deal with cryomass was that Tony got another guy who's worth big money, 9 figures, and he runs the company, and they have a machine that for harvesting pot harvests the parts of the pot plant you want, using nitrogen and to cool it. Anyway, it sounds like a great technology. It's supposed to be working, and it's supposed to be a great stock promotion built around this technology. That's the good news, I guess. The bad news is that nobody cares about pot stocks now because there were hundreds of them out there, and most of them were crap. Okay, so that was a bubble that burst. Is it going to reinflate? I don't know. Is pot going to become a really viable industry? And this unique technology, which is, they say, important for anybody who grows the plant. And growing pot commercially is kind of a stupid idea. It's like growing alfalfa, except it's highly regulated and highly taxed. I mean, other than that. So, all right, cryomass. I got a whole bunch of shares from way back when, and I still own them because I think Tony might pull it off, and maybe there's some truth to it. But maybe it's just one of those things. Maybe it'll go to $5, or maybe it'll go to 0. I don't know. I paid 10 cents for it, so
manage your risk well. Manage your risk well is the important thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially because if the whole markets are turning down, then it also makes these more speculative things riskier, right? And the market environment's different today than it was when we talked about, was it December, I think?
Yeah, that's right. It's the little startup companies that they're the ones that always get hurt worse. They're the ones that get dumped first. Yeah. So it's weak, but I still own mine for what it's worth,
Okay. All right, Doug, they asked for 3 favorite small cap exploration companies at the moment, but even if you just have, one that comes to mind, is there any that you really like right now?
Can't think of one.
Really? Is that weird for you to not have like 1 or 2 in your back pocket?
I could go down the list of stocks that I own and stocks that I'm looking to buy, but
and there's nothing there.
Well, it's not entirely true. Like, I think the last thing that I mentioned, the last thing that I bought here was Petrobras, the Brazilian national oil company. Why?
Not a small cap. Not a small cap though.
Not a small cap, but it's selling at 4 times earnings. It has a 20% dividend yield. And maybe people don't like it because it's Brazil, and Brazil can be chaotic, especially if they kick out Bolsonaro and put in Lula, the communist.
So it looks like they will.
Yeah, it kind of looks that way. So maybe that's one reason that it's down. And of course, oil stocks are still down and really cheap because everybody thinks that the world's going to wind and solar, which it's not. So I think that's the last thing that I mentioned. Okay. Like that. I own it. Also, I've got to mention, it's got gigantic, just like I mentioned before that, Moderna, where I was selling naked calls, because I think the company's, I'm not going to say it's a fraud, but what's the next best thing to a fraud, where you're making a lot of money based on a political scam. So I've been consistently selling calls against Moderna for huge premiums, and they're still there. So that's been quite successful. And Petrobras, there are huge premiums on this low price stock, selling options against it. And I don't mind selling the puts because I'll buy more. And if I get called away, then anyway, it's just a couple stocks to look at. That's all.
Okay. All right, good. How do you evaluate the right percentage of cash to hold during these uncertain times, especially for individuals still focused on wealth accumulation and looking for fire sale stock prices at some point in the future?
Well, I guess it's better to lose 10 or 15% per year to depreciation of the currency in your cash account than it is to take a chance on losing 50% overnight in some stock or the market in general that collapses.
Yeah.
And of course, it does give you flexibility to jump on something that you really like.
Is
I
there,
hold, I hold a lot of cash. I mean, I've never held cash in the past, but I do now.
really, how much has that changed? Like, as let's say the percentage of cash you have on hand today versus the percentage of cash you had on hand 5 years ago. What's
Oh,
that change?
it's much higher. I've never been a cash guy, but now I am. But maybe it makes no sense because the cash I hold is the unsecured liability of some bank or brokerage firm.
Of course, yeah.
I know it's going to be like the situation in Cyprus some years ago, where if you have over the insured amount, oh, sorry, it's not there anymore. I mean, that can happen.
It can
So
happen, but there's a reason why you're doing it. It must make you feel more comfortable given the uncertainty in the markets. It must be just something drawing you to that.
yeah, because I just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I can see the market collapsing or just grinding down, down, down for years. And yes, I own a lot of oil stocks, and gold stocks are actually, I was looking at a chart put out by ASA, the gold company, and it was a very interesting chart. It showed it went back to 1970, so it's a long time, and it showed the relative valuation of gold to gold stocks. And it turns out that right now, gold stocks are about as cheap relative to gold as they've ever been in history.
Hmm.
And they had another chart there, and of course they're a gold company, so they select charts that kind of
Tell
talk
the
their
story.
book.
Yeah.
But I've said for several years that gold is, since it's been around 1800 to 2000, it's kind of reasonably priced relative to the cost of a meal, the cost of a suit, all these things. It's not like a giveaway bargain now, which it was back in 2001. It's not like that anymore. But I think it can go a lot higher for a lot of other reasons. Okay. But I think the gold stocks are the way to play it if you want capital gains. They really are pretty cheap. And maybe we'll have one more bubble where the Robin Hood people decide, my God, gold stocks, that's where we want to be. Anyway, they're cheap, low risk. I mean, big stocks like Barrick and Newmont are paying like, I don't know, 3% dividends, which is considerably more than the average S&P stock is.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's energy stocks and mining stocks, even though mining is the crappiest industry in the world. Well, maybe not the crappiest, but it's pretty crappy.
Pretty crappy.
So,
Okay. What are your general thoughts on Dubai?
oh, well, I first went to Dubai in the early 1980s when the airport, and I didn't even leave the airport because there was nothing in Dubai, and the airport was a kind of a crappy little airport, not much bigger than the airport in Aspen, Colorado. I'm not kidding you. That's what it was. There was nothing there in Dubai. And now the airport in Dubai is one of the largest and busiest in the world, and Dubai, so this place, it's just amazing. It's come out of nowhere. I wrote a long article about it 20 years ago, but it's had some ups and downs. And I wonder about Dubai as much as I like it, because on the one hand, it's a Muslim country, and the values there, problematical, especially if you're a dhimmi, a non-Muslim. But they leave you alone, and it's free market oriented. And, if you're, it's the big problem with it. It's that it's in the desert. I mean, it really was built out of sand, and the desert is your enemy. It's always working against you. That sand is wearing away the buildings and takes immense amounts of energy. Yes, I know. Abu Dhabi, which is, only like 50 miles to the north, produces huge amounts of oil. Dubai doesn't have any of that. They made it being a free market entrepreneur, really. Mm-hmm. So I really like Dubai. I really wish it well. It's a great place to be, but don't know. I mean, but it's one of the world's great, in all of world's history. It's one of the world's great success stories. There's nothing, I can't think of anything that's quite as successful as Dubai. Singapore is another example. Very similar. Yeah. Got a more solid foundation than Dubai does. Singapore, in my opinion. Hong Kong, another example. Will the Chinese destroy Hong Kong? Well, I don't know. I think China's likely to have I think China's heading for a brick wall, quite frankly. So it's not the threat that I don't know about Dubai. I like it though.
Yeah, I like it. But if you're imagining, a deteriorating global macro environment, it's got to have some negative effects on Dubai, you would think, especially if global trade is sort of fracturing, if resources are and supply chains are becoming more complex or broken, then you just see that the place that has to import virtually everything they need in order to, keep the people there surviving. I don't know. Doesn't make me feel great.
Yeah, that's right. It's the situation's got to be monitored. If I was going to choose between Dubai and let's say Singapore, I'd go for Singapore.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Let's see. What do you think about the world's criminals flying their private jets into Davos and eating $51 burritos while talking about climate change?
It just amazes me. I did a little bit of research on Klaus Schwab, and it turns out that he was at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland 3 years before me. So if I was 3 years older, I could have met Klaus. It wouldn't have changed anything in my life. I know even then we would not have grooved on each other. But it makes me ask myself, is that there's supposed to be all kinds of small backpack nukes that are floating around the world. How come somebody hasn't let one off in Dubai just to see?
Not Dubai, you mean Davos. In Davos.
Just to see what would happen. And I saw the list of attendees at this last conference, about 350 official attendees, lots and lots of hangers on and all this kind of stuff, I guess, that aren't on the list. But, the big corporate guys and heads of state and just horrible people. I mean, God,
I was happy to see, Doug, that there was no official representative from Uruguay there.
Oh, well, that's probably just because they can't afford it. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. Very expensive.
But there were a whole bunch of, there were several, well, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of Latin American countries did. Brazil did, of course. All kinds of African countries did. So, I don't know. The U.S. naturally had lots.
Yeah, I don't know what goes on there. It's just people making speeches and making blah blah and setting up deals to enrich themselves and keep the plebs down. I mean, it's just horrible. And there are at least, a half dozen groups like World Economic Forum out there. That's the biggest and most popular, but there's a bunch of them. And I went to one in New York about 5 years ago. where they had all the usual suspects. They had Kissinger and Soros and all these horrible people speaking. And it was just, I mean, I don't know what the hell I was doing there. I got invited because I was, well, our partner at the Estancia de Cafajate is a rich Greek who actually wanted sponsors this. So that's how I got invited. He said, "Oh, let's invite this guy," you know. I was invited back, you know, so we got invited.
Yeah, they're interesting groups. Let's see. Next question here. What do you think about your neighbor, Bolivia? It does not appear to be an expat destination. Could it be? I certainly like their non-coercive approach to the pandemic problem.
Well, Bolivia really should be at least 2 and maybe 3 separate countries, sociologically speaking. The area around Santa Cruz in the lowlands is, yeah, it's beautiful, it's mellow, it's actually quite European, but the mountain areas where the capital is it's Indian country, frankly, and you know, it really shouldn't be one country because they're sociologically and in all ways very at each other's throats. But who's running Bolivia now? Is it that Indian who was the first Indian who was elected president?
Morales?
Morales.
I don't know if he's still the guy. I'm not sure if he's still the guy or not.
Yeah, one of the things that he did when he was in office was to purposefully migrate about 60,000 Indians from the highlands. I mean, it's amazing. These people are living like at 12,000 feet. I mean, it's cold and dry and horrible. I don't know how anybody can live up there. So he, you know, migrated about 60,000 of them down to the lowlands around Santa Cruz. I don't know whatever happened from that. How they worked with there's so many things that are happening in the world that we just don't know, because unless you have a friend that's on the spot that's telling you, well, here's what happened, you just don't know. But,
yeah, the new president is Luis Arce. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's ARCE. Luis Arce.
Don't know anything about him. Have to look into that. But
don't know. Okay. Let's see. You just already answered that question. See, someone says that they've decided to stay in their country, Iceland, during this whole collapse or whatever is coming, if only because I'm curious to see what happens. Says I'm fairly prepared with food, guns, etc. What does Doug think I should do to prepare better for this?
Well, you know, I have a soft spot in my heart for Iceland because I went there and spent a week there in the early 70s and had a hell of a time. I mean, I thought it was great. And if the Vikings could live there, I mean, here's a country that's, you know, you can hardly even grow grass in Iceland. If the Vikings could make it 1,000 years ago, I mean, I think you'll do just fine. And they're not going to have a social upset because they haven't, unlike Sweden, they haven't, you know, imported hundreds of thousands of foreigners that hate them.
Yeah, they haven't destroyed their country and culture in that way.
Yeah, of course, you stick around in Iceland long enough. I don't know how long enough is. It could be tomorrow morning, or it could be 50,000 years from now. It's on a magmatic hotspot in the world, and it's going to blow sky high and cease to exist. But so, I mean, you can't take stuff like that into consideration.
Well, and also, if that does happen, you won't know.
No, you won't know. That's right. It'll be onto something new and different, or whatever.
Good. So any well, I guess he has a part 2 busy question. He says, and aren't there also great opportunities to be had in those situations? The chaotic situations that we're in right now and that is escalating right now?
Yeah, yeah. There's got to be, but there's got to be. I mean, listen. This is why I've always said. I've said this many, many times that if I was in my 20s or 30s or even 40s, I just wander around Africa for all the reasons I've listed in the past because it's chaos. And yeah, absolutely. There's lots of piles of money laying in the corner that nobody knows how to take advantage of. So yeah, that's certainly true, but it depends on your personal situation, your personal psychology. I don't have any specific advice right now. Do you see any particular spot of chaos that should be capitalized on? What?
I think that we have not. I think we were just tiptoeing in the shallow water of the chaos that's coming so far, Doug. So I think that there are big opportunities will reveal themselves, but I think that it's almost like we're in a kind of a buy the dip situation. So anything that might look like an opportunity now, I feel like is just a, the enthusiasm has not been wrung out of anything yet. I think that we're just going to get so much more chaotic, so much worse, and there's going to be great opportunities in the bottom of that. But when the biggest thing that I have to do to remind myself is that when those times come where those opportunities are there, I won't want to do anything about it. I have to look at my own psychology. I'll be so disgusted with it or sick of it or so afraid of it that I won't want to touch it. And when that's there, I'll know that there must be some good opportunities around.
Absolutely correct. Perfectly well said, in my opinion. This may be like with the tsunami, before the tsunami comes in, you can run out into the seashore and pick up all those nice shells. But when the tsunami comes, you're just trying to stay alive. Forget about the seashells that you could have picked up.
That feels like where we are now. I think that's a great metaphor. Okay. Let's see. Doug, why do you think that countries who only survive on tourism still have a bogus PCR test and or a quarantine in place for visitors?
It can only be stupidity or the fact that their leaders are of a certain class, kind of people that want to go to Davos or things of that nature. And they just, they're just sheep that are in power. So I don't know.
It's clearly self-destructive for the thing that they're supposed to, yeah.
That makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. But like Einstein said, this can't be repeated enough. After hydrogen, stupidity is the most common thing in the universe.
Yeah, I mean, the only rational explanations that I can think of is that, maybe they have some, maybe it's their cousin who owns the PCR testing business, or maybe they get money from the WHO or the World Bank or something like that, for pandemic preparedness to keep these programs in place. We know that they did a lot of that over the last couple of years, and I don't know, maybe there might be some of that that's still in place, and that's why they keep it.
Yeah, I know. That's right, and it's just the bovine stupidity of the average person. Coming across on the ferry from Uruguay here to Buenos Aires yesterday, I would say that even though the mass psychosis has broken over the world, I'd say that probably 15 to 20% of the people were still wearing masks. And when I came back, when I entered my building, there's a woman who acts as a concierge that greeted us and all this, and small talk. And she says, "Oh, and I'm so glad that I got my shots because I'm sure we'd be dead." You can't argue with any of this stuff.
No. Okay. Let's see. A couple more questions, Doug. In the past, Doug has talked about the negatives of building a planned community of libertarians, like in Argentina. But what are his thoughts about lobbying like-minded people to move to a state and peacefully take it over through the ballot box, like the Free State Project?
Well, how's the Free State Project worked out? I mean, a bunch of libertarians have moved there so that if a man on a white horse is elected in 2024, and he's like that ex-CIA guy, Clapper or whoever it was, that named libertarians as some of the dissidents that ought to be rounded up. can be like one-stop shopping.
That's true.
Around, I think it's around Keene, New Hampshire.
Yep.
So I don't know. Listen, it's a nice idea. I tried it. Doesn't work out too well in practice usually. I mean, listen, there's a friend of ours who's on a chat group that we're members of, that he's got a small, interesting island that he can take over that's developed and all. I don't know. I mean,
I think he could pull it off because the numbers are so small, Doug. I think he could pull it off. I think he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah, we're talking more like 500 as opposed to even 5,000 people. So for the kind of competence level libertarians have, 500 might be a doable number. You get around that. But you know, I've always said I'll try anything once, twice if I like it. So I guess I haven't learned my lesson yet. So yeah, okay.
All right. Last question, Doug. What should low-income people do to invest during a depression? It says, my wife and I are asset poor, but also debt free. Should we go a bit heavier on metals since we do not have enough money for real estate?
Okay, well, sure. I guess that makes sense. But look, there's a more basic question here, and that is, you got to make sure that you got to earn more money, and you got to accumulate more money. That's the solution, really. So redouble your efforts. Start figuring stuff out. What goods and services you can offer to other people. And if you're not in a position to offer valuable goods and services, well, you got to ask yourself, well, why can't I? What have I done wrong? What do I got to learn?
That's right.
So
good.
I guess that's the answer. You know, it's like it's like that. It's like in the last public speech that Ayn Rand gave was in New Orleans in 1982, I think. Yes, November 1982. And she was not popular with this audience of Republicans at the time. And somebody sent a question up from the audience, says, Miss Rand, what would you do about the poor? And her answer was, instead of giving a long economic explanation about, well, I do this, that, and the other issues, she said, make sure you're not one of them. Next question. That's the best answer.
It is. It is. Because the whole thing is, it's not as though you can't do something about it. There is something you can do. That's the important thing. And you just, if you don't know what it is, you're just not thinking about the problem creatively enough.
Yeah. And it's also, you know, the thing is, our friend Paul Rosenberg sent out a short thing today. We ought to have a link to that. I don't know if you saw his post today or not. It was quite good. It was about the fact that all the bad things that are happening in the world and being promoted in the world as being the state of the world are, you know, depressing and discouraging to everybody. And when you get depressed and discouraged, then you start feeling, oh, there's nothing I can do to change the world. I'm just being washed away in the tidal wave. So I thought it was very good what Paul pointed out, that you can't let that happen to you. You can't, you know, you've got to, and of course, listen, I guess we have to apologize for always seeing the gloomy side of things, but hey, you ask a question, you know, is that cat black? If the cat's black, yeah, I'll say
it's black.
So I'm sorry it's black instead of white, or that's non-PC, that's racist. White instead of black, or whatever, gray, I don't know. But you got to call them the way you see them.
Right.
But at the same time, when everything is that way and being promoted that way, that's the problem. They're promoting these things. Yeah, it tends to, you know, make people act like sheep and say, oh, tell me where to go and what to do to solve my problem.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, we do talk about a lot of doom and gloom here. That's true. I don't think either one of us are, you know, pessimistic people, though. I think we actually are optimistic about a lot of things, at least about the things that are within our control and what we can do, and, actively trying to make our situations as good as possible. But, if there is a war that's going on now, besides the war in Ukraine, it's a psychological war. It's a psychological war. It's designed to disempower you, to make you more docile and weak, make you to give up things that they don't have to, so that no force has to be exercised against you in order for you to lose what you have, your freedom, all that. You give them up freely, just like everyone gave stuff up in the pandemic. We're doing it constantly by cowering in fear because of the depressing stuff that's sent our way constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I deal with it personally is, following Solzhenitsyn's advice. It's when you see something that's a lie, don't let them get away with the lie. Call them on it. You have to do that, number one. And number two is treat this all as a gigantic comedy, which is really all it is.
I
Kind of
agree.
a budget comedy, but still.
Yeah, but it's amazing at the same time. It's amazing. The stuff that's all happening now is actually unbelievable.
It is
It's
unbelievable.
really so it's entertaining. All right. Well, we'll leave it there, Doug. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great, Matt. Thanks.